The crimson stains on Vivian Ashworth's pristine white wedding dress looked like abstract roses blooming across silk and lace, but she knew they weren't decorative, they were blood from the shirt that had fallen from the anonymous gift box just moments before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. Her hands trembled as she held the evidence of something so horrific that her mind couldn't fully process it, the expensive white dress shirt that belonged to her fiancé Dante Blackthorne, soaked in what could only be someone else's blood, delivered to her bridal suite with a simple note that read, "Ask him about Marcus Chen." In less than 10 minutes, 300 guests were expecting to witness the wedding of the century between the daughter of tech mogul Harrison Ashworth and the son of real estate empire builder Theodore Blackthorne. Instead, Vivian stood frozen in her bridal suite, staring at evidence that the man she loved, the man she had planned to pledge her life to, might be a killer. Just 24 hours earlier, Vivian had been blissfully happy, putting the finishing touches on what every magazine was calling, the wedding of the decade. She and Dante had been together for 3 years, ever since meeting at a charity gala where he had charmed her with his intelligence, his devastating smile, and his apparent dedication to using his family's wealth for philanthropic causes. Dante Blackthorne was everything Vivian had ever dreamed of in a partner: handsome, successful, passionate about social justice, and seemingly devoted to her in a way that made her feel like the luckiest woman alive. Their engagement had been a fairy tale, complete with a surprise proposal during a sunset helicopter ride over the Pacific Ocean and a ring that had once belonged to European royalty. But as Vivian stood holding the blood-soaked shirt, fragments of conversations and incidents from the past few months began clicking into place like pieces of a sinister puzzle she hadn't realized she was solving. There was the night 3 weeks ago when Dante had come home with scratches on his hands that he claimed came from helping a friend move furniture. There was his strange phone call 2 weeks earlier where she had overheard him saying, "The problem needs to be permanently resolved," before quickly ending the conversation when he noticed she was listening. Most disturbing of all, there was the name on the note, Marcus Chen, which she now remembered as the investigative journalist who had been researching the Blackthorne family's business practices and had mysteriously disappeared just days before his exposé was supposed to be published. The wedding preparations had been so consuming that Vivian had pushed these nagging doubts to the back of her mind, convincing herself that she was being paranoid or that there were innocent explanations for everything that seemed suspicious. She had been so focused on creating the perfect day, on living up to the expectations of their wealthy families and social circle, that she had ignored the voice in her head that whispered something was wrong. Now, holding physical evidence that her fiancé might be involved in something terrible, she realized that love had made her willfully blind to signs that should have been impossible to ignore. The knock on her bridal suite door made her jump like a gunshot. "Vivian, darling, it's time," called her mother, Catherine Ashworth, in the perfectly modulated voice she used for important social occasions. "The ceremony begins in 8 minutes, and your father is waiting to escort you down the aisle." Vivian quickly shoved the bloody shirt back into the gift box and hid it behind the elaborate flower arrangements that decorated her preparation room, her mind racing as she tried to process what she should do with this information. Walking down the aisle became a surreal nightmare as Vivian tried to maintain the serene smile expected of a radiant bride while internally screaming with confusion and terror. The church was magnificent, decorated with thousands of white roses and filled with the most influential people in the city, all of them watching her with the kind of attention usually reserved for royalty or celebrities. Her father, Harrison Ashworth, squeezed her arm gently as they walked, mistaking her trembling for normal wedding nerves. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he whispered. "Dante is the luckiest man in the world." But as Vivian looked toward the altar where her fiancé stood waiting in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, all she could think about was the blood-stained shirt hidden in her bridal suite and what it might mean about the man she had promised to love forever. Dante looked devastatingly handsome as always, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile warm and loving as he watched her approach. But now Vivian found herself studying his face with new eyes, searching for signs of the darkness she had apparently missed during 3 years of courtship. His hands, she noticed, were perfectly manicured and showed no trace of the scratches she remembered from weeks earlier. His expression was that of a man completely at peace, someone without a care in the world beyond marrying the woman he adored. Either he was innocent of whatever the bloody shirt implied, or he was a far better actor than she had ever suspected. The ceremony proceeded like a beautifully choreographed performance, with Vivian going through the motions of exchanging vows while her mind raced through possibilities and explanations. When the minister asked if anyone had any objections to the union, she half expected someone to stand up and reveal the truth about Marcus Chen or explain the blood on Dante's shirt. But the church remained silent except for the rustle of expensive fabric and the quiet sniffles of emotional relatives. When Dante took her hands for the ring exchange, she searched his eyes desperately for some sign of guilt or deception, but saw only love and happiness that seemed completely genuine. Do you, Dante Blackthorne, take Vivian to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? The minister's words took on ominous meaning as Vivian wondered if she was promising her life to someone who had taken another person's life. When it was her turn to recite the same vows, her voice nearly broke on the words, "till death do us part," as she wondered if Marcus Chen had died because he had discovered something that threatened Dante's carefully constructed public image. The reception that followed was a lavish affair at the Blackthorne family estate, with a ballroom that had been transformed into something resembling a fairy tale palace. Vivian moved through the celebration like an actress playing a role, accepting congratulations and compliments while internally wrestling with the decision of what to do about the bloody shirt. Part of her wanted to confront Dante immediately, to demand an explanation for the evidence that suggested he might be involved in something terrible. But another part of her feared what she might learn, worried that asking questions would destroy not just her marriage but potentially put her own life in danger. The evening took an even more sinister turn when Vivian noticed Detective Sarah Martinez among the wedding guests, a detail that seemed odd since neither she nor Dante had mentioned inviting anyone from law enforcement. Detective Martinez was known for handling high-profile criminal cases, particularly those involving wealthy suspects who used their resources to avoid consequences for their actions. Her presence at the wedding could be coincidental, but given everything else that had happened, Vivian found it difficult to believe in coincidences. During the dinner service, Vivian excused herself to return to her bridal suite, claiming she needed to touch up her makeup. What she really wanted was to examine the bloody shirt more carefully and try to understand what she was supposed to do with this information. But when she reached the room where she had hidden the gift box, it was gone. Someone had removed the evidence while she was at the ceremony, leaving behind only the elaborate flower arrangements and no trace that the box had ever existed. The realization that someone had been monitoring her discovery filled Vivian with a terror that made her previous fear seem trivial by comparison. If the bloody shirt had been removed so quickly and efficiently, it meant that whoever had sent it was watching her closely enough to know exactly when she would be away from the room. It also meant that this wasn't a simple case of someone trying to expose Dante's potential crimes. This was a carefully orchestrated situation designed to manipulate her for reasons she couldn't yet understand. When Vivian returned to the reception, she found Dante charming their guests with stories about their courtship and his plans for their honeymoon in Italy. He seemed completely relaxed and genuinely happy, showing no signs of stress or concern that might suggest he knew about the bloody shirt or its implications. Either he was innocent of any wrongdoing, or he was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined, capable of committing murder and then celebrating his wedding as if nothing had happened. The evening grew more complex when Vivian overheard a conversation between Detective Martinez and Theodore Blackthorne, Dante's father. They were speaking in low voices near the bar, but she caught fragments that made her blood run cold. Investigation has been difficult, powerful families can make evidence disappear, need someone on the inside. The implication that Detective Martinez was investigating the Blackthorne family, and possibly needed Vivian's help as an inside source, added another layer of danger to an already impossible situation. But the most chilling moment came during the father-daughter dance, when Harrison Ashworth whispered something that changed everything Vivian thought she understood about the evening's events. "I hope you know what you're doing, sweetheart," he said as they swayed to the orchestra's rendition of "The Way You Look Tonight." Some investigations require sacrifices that go beyond what anyone should have to make. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her own father was somehow involved in whatever was happening with Detective Martinez and the investigation into the Blackthorne family. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place with terrifying clarity. The bloody shirt hadn't been sent by some anonymous whistleblower trying to warn her about Dante's potential crimes, it had been sent by people who wanted to turn her into an informant against her new husband. Her father, who had always seemed like a loving parent primarily concerned with her happiness, had apparently agreed to let his daughter be used as bait in some kind of law enforcement operation targeting the Blackthorne family. The conversation she managed to overhear between her father and Detective Martinez during the cake-cutting ceremony confirmed her worst suspicions. "She's smart and observant," Harrison was saying. "If there's evidence of criminal activity in that house, Vivian will find it. And her testimony will carry more weight than anything we could get from outside surveillance." Detective Martinez nodded grimly. "I just hope we're not putting her in more danger than she can handle. If the Blackthorns are responsible for Marcus Chen's disappearance, they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens their operation." Vivian realized with growing horror that she had been maneuvered into marriage not just by love, but by a law enforcement strategy that treated her as an expendable asset in a larger investigation. Her father and Detective Martinez had apparently decided that the best way to get close to the Blackthorne family's alleged criminal activities was to have an informant living in their house, sharing their bed, and having access to their private conversations and documents. The bloody shirt had been sent to ensure her cooperation by making her believe that Dante was dangerous and that she had a moral obligation to help bring him to justice. But the most devastating realization was that she still didn't know if Dante was actually guilty of anything. The bloody shirt could have been fake, planted evidence designed to make her suspicious and cooperative. Marcus Chen's disappearance might be completely unrelated to the Blackthorne family, or it might be the result of his investigation into other powerful people entirely. She had been thrust into the role of spy and potential victim without knowing whether her target was actually a criminal or just another pawn in someone else's game. The decision of what to do with this information became even more complicated when Vivian discovered something that changed her understanding of the entire situation. While dancing with Dante during their first dance as husband and wife, she noticed something that made her question everything she thought she knew about the evening's events. His shirt cuff had pulled back slightly, revealing what appeared to be fresh stitches on his wrist, the kind of medical sutures that might be used to treat defensive wounds sustained during a struggle. "What happened to your arm?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual despite the fear racing through her veins. Dante's smile faltered for just a moment before returning to its previous warmth. "Kitchen accident yesterday while I was cooking dinner for the bachelor party," he said smoothly. "Cut myself on a broken glass while doing dishes. Stupid mistake, but the doctor said it wasn't serious enough to interfere with our wedding plans." The explanation sounded plausible, but Vivian had learned enough about deception over the past few hours to recognize when someone was lying. The stitches on Dante's wrist looked too neat and professional to have come from a kitchen accident, and his story about cooking dinner for his bachelor party didn't match what she remembered him telling her about his plans for that evening. More importantly, the location and pattern of the injury looked consistent with what she had learned about defensive wounds from the crime documentaries she watched, the kind of injuries someone might sustain while fighting for their life. As the evening progressed and guests began to leave, Vivian found herself in the impossible position of trying to decide whether to confront her new husband about her suspicions or to play along with what might be an elaborate law enforcement setup. If Dante was innocent and she accused him of murder based on planted evidence, she would destroy their marriage and possibly ruin an innocent man's life. But if he was guilty and she failed to gather evidence against him, she might be enabling someone who had already killed once and might kill again to protect his secrets. The decision was made for her when she discovered Detective Martinez waiting in the estate's library after most of the guests had departed. "We need to talk," the detective said without preamble. "Your father told me you received the package with the evidence, and we need to discuss what happens next." The conversation that followed revealed the full scope of the operation that had been planned without Vivian's knowledge or consent. Marcus Chen, it turned out, had been investigating not just the Blackthorne family's business practices, but their alleged connections to several unsolved murders dating back over a decade. The journalist had been close to exposing a pattern of violence used to eliminate business rivals, investigative reporters, and anyone else who threatened the family's financial empire. His disappearance 3 days before his story was supposed to be published had all the hallmarks of the previous eliminations, but law enforcement had never been able to gather enough evidence to prove the Blackthorne family's involvement. The bloody shirt was real, Detective Martinez explained. We recovered it from Marcus Chen's apartment after he disappeared. The DNA analysis confirms it belongs to your husband, and the blood matches Marcus's type. What we need now is access to the Blackthorne house, their private communications, and anything else that might help us build a case against them. The detective's tone was matter-of-fact, as if she was discussing a routine business arrangement rather than asking a new bride to spy on her husband for evidence of murder. Vivian stared at Detective Martinez in shock, finally understanding the full magnitude of what was being asked of her. You want me to live in a house with someone you believe is a killer, pretend to be a loving wife, and secretly gather evidence that could put him in prison for the rest of his life. And you think this is a reasonable thing to ask someone on their wedding day? I think it's the only way to get justice for Marcus Chen and prevent future murders, Detective Martinez replied. Your father agreed to this arrangement because he understands that sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. The Blackthorne family has been using their wealth and connections to literally get away with murder for years, and you're our best chance to finally stop them. The conversation was interrupted by Dante's arrival in the library, his presence changing the entire dynamic of the situation. Detective Martinez, he said with apparent surprise. I didn't realize you were still here. I hope you enjoyed the reception. His tone was perfectly polite, but Vivian noticed the subtle tension in his posture and the way his eyes moved between her and the detective as if he was trying to assess what they had been discussing. I was just congratulating your wife on the beautiful ceremony, Detective Martinez replied smoothly. I was also mentioning that I might need to speak with both of you in the coming weeks about the Marcus Chen investigation. I understand he was researching your family's business interests before his disappearance. Dante's reaction was fascinating to watch, his expression remained calm and concerned, but Vivian noticed his hands clench slightly before relaxing again. Of course, Detective. We're happy to help however we can, though I'm not sure what information we could provide. The Blackthorne family has always operated with complete transparency and legal compliance. The words were exactly what an innocent person might say, but something in his delivery made Vivian wonder if he was performing for her benefit rather than expressing genuine cooperation. After Detective Martinez left, Vivian found herself alone with her new husband for the first time since discovering the bloody shirt. They were supposed to be heading to their honeymoon suite, beginning the first night of their married life, but instead she felt like she was trapped in a psychological thriller where she couldn't distinguish between the heroes and villains. Dante was either an innocent man being framed for crimes he didn't commit, or a dangerous killer who was skilled enough at deception to fool someone who loved him completely. You seem troubled, Dante observed as they walked through the mansion toward their private suite. I know weddings can be overwhelming, but I hoped you were happy with how everything turned out. His concern seemed genuine, his voice warm with the affection she had fallen in love with 3 years earlier. But now she found herself analyzing every word and gesture, looking for signs of manipulation or deception that she had missed before. I keep thinking about that journalist who disappeared, she said, testing his reaction. Marcus Chen. It seems strange that someone would just vanish right before publishing an important story. She watched Dante's face carefully, looking for any flicker of guilt or fear that might confirm Detective Martinez's suspicions about his involvement in the journalist's disappearance. Dante paused before answering, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. It is strange, he agreed. Marcus was actually a more thorough investigator than most people realized. If someone made him disappear, it was probably because he had discovered something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. I just hope the police find him safe, though the longer he's missing, the less likely that becomes. The response was interesting because it didn't sound like what a guilty person would say, it showed knowledge about Marcus Chen's work and genuine concern for his welfare. But it also revealed that Dante knew more about the missing journalist than he had previously admitted, which raised new questions about his potential involvement in whatever had happened. Vivian realized that she was becoming skilled at reading subtext and analyzing motivations in a way that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. Their wedding night became an exercise in performance art, with both of them pretending to be happy newlyweds while secretly harboring suspicions and fears about each other. Vivian went through the motions of romantic intimacy while internally wrestling with the knowledge that she might be sharing a bed with someone who had committed murder less than 48 hours earlier. Dante seemed loving and attentive, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her reactions more carefully than usual, perhaps trying to determine how much she knew about his alleged crimes. The next morning brought new complications when Vivian discovered that someone had searched her belongings while she was sleeping. Her purse had been carefully gone through, her phone had been moved from where she had left it, and her laptop showed signs of being accessed despite being password protected. Either Dante had been investigating her while she slept, or someone else had been in their room during the night. Both possibilities were equally terrifying. But the most disturbing discovery came when she found a hidden camera in their bedroom, disguised as part of the elaborate light fixture above their bed. The device was sophisticated and expensive, the kind of equipment used by law enforcement for surveillance operations. The realization that someone had been watching and recording their most intimate moments filled Vivian with a rage that overcame her fear. Whether the camera had been installed by Detective Martinez as part of the investigation or by Dante for reasons she couldn't imagine, the violation of her privacy was unforgivable. The confrontation that followed revealed truths that were more complex and dangerous than anything Vivian had imagined. When she presented Dante with the hidden camera, his reaction was not guilt or defensiveness but genuine shock and anger that matched her own. "Someone has been watching us," he said grimly, examining the device with the expertise of someone familiar with surveillance equipment. "This isn't law enforcement standard, it's more sophisticated than anything the police typically use. Someone with serious resources and advanced technical capabilities wanted to monitor our conversations and activities." The conversation that followed forced both of them to reveal secrets they had been keeping from each other. Dante admitted that he had suspected for months that someone was investigating his family, and that he had been taking precautions to protect both himself and Vivian from potential danger. The scratches on his hands hadn't come from helping a friend move furniture, they had come from a confrontation with someone who had been following Vivian and taking photographs of her daily activities. "I didn't want to frighten you or ruin our wedding plans," he explained, "but someone has been stalking you for weeks. When I confronted the man who was taking pictures outside your office building, he attacked me with a knife before running away. That's how I got the cuts on my hands, and that's why I've been more protective lately." Vivian stared at her husband, trying to process this new information while reconciling it with what Detective Martinez had told her about the bloody shirt and Marcus Chen's disappearance. "If you were protecting me from a stalker," she said slowly, "then why is there physical evidence connecting you to Marcus Chen's blood? And why didn't you tell me about any of this before now?" The answer revealed the most shocking twist in an already incredible story. The bloody shirt that had been presented as evidence of Dante's guilt in Marcus Chen's disappearance was real, but it hadn't gotten bloody from an attack on the journalist. It had gotten bloody from Dante's attempt to save Marcus Chen's life after finding him beaten and left for dead by unknown assailants. "Marcus came to me 3 days before our wedding," Dante explained, his voice heavy with emotion. "He had discovered something about my family's business dealings that he thought I should know about before marrying you. But more importantly, he had evidence that someone was planning to kill both of us to prevent his story from being published and to eliminate me as a potential witness to other crimes." The story that emerged was far more complex than simple murder or family business corruption. Marcus Chen had been investigating not just the Blackthorne family, but a much larger criminal conspiracy involving multiple wealthy families, corrupt law enforcement officials, and a pattern of eliminations that had been disguised as accidents, suicides, and disappearances for over a decade. The Blackthorne family hadn't been perpetrators, they had been victims, with several family members dying under suspicious circumstances over the years. "My father, my uncle, and my cousin all died in what were ruled accidents or natural causes," Dante continued. "But Marcus had evidence that they were actually murdered because they had discovered the conspiracy and were planning to expose it. The same people who killed my family members were planning to eliminate both Marcus and me, but they needed to make it look like we were the criminals rather than the victims." The bloody shirt, according to Dante's account, had gotten stained when he found Marcus Chen beaten unconscious in an alley near the journalist's apartment. Dante had attempted first aid while calling for an ambulance, which explained the blood on his clothing. But before the paramedics arrived, Marcus had regained consciousness long enough to tell Dante that the attack had been a warning, and that both of them would be killed if they didn't disappear immediately. "Marcus is alive," Dante said, seeing the hope in Vivian's eyes. "But he's in hiding, trying to gather enough evidence to expose the real conspiracy before they can eliminate all the witnesses. The people who want us dead have been using my family's reputation and wealth as a cover story, making it appear that we're the ones committing crimes while they operate in the shadows." The revelation forced Vivian to reconsider everything she thought she knew about Detective Martinez, her father's involvement, and the true purpose of the surveillance operation. If Dante was telling the truth about the conspiracy, then Detective Martinez might not be a legitimate law enforcement officer trying to solve crimes. She might be part of the criminal organization that had been eliminating witnesses and covering up evidence for years. The possibility that her own father had been manipulated or coerced into cooperating with criminals who wanted to use his daughter as bait was almost too horrible to contemplate. But as Vivian thought back over the conversations she had overheard and the strange circumstances surrounding the bloody shirt, she began to see a pattern that supported Dante's version of events rather than Detective Martinez's. The decision of what to do with this information became even more urgent when they discovered that their house was surrounded by unmarked vehicles and people with surveillance equipment. Whether they were law enforcement officers conducting a legitimate investigation or criminal operatives preparing to eliminate potential witnesses, their presence made it clear that Vivian and Dante were running out of time to escape whatever trap had been set for them. "We need to leave now," Dante said, gathering important documents and cash from a hidden safe. "If we stay here, we're going to end up like Marcus, either dead or framed for crimes we didn't commit. The people behind this conspiracy have unlimited resources and connections throughout law enforcement, which means we can't trust anyone in official positions." The escape from their own home felt surreal and terrifying, like something from an action movie rather than real life. They slipped out through a basement passage that connected to the estate's old wine cellar, emerging in the woods behind the property where Dante had hidden a car with supplies and fake identification documents. The preparation suggested that he had been expecting something like this to happen, which either proved his foresight or his guilt. Vivian still wasn't entirely sure which. Their flight led them to a safe house that Marcus Chen had established before his disappearance, a remote cabin in the mountains where the journalist had been hiding while gathering evidence against the criminal conspiracy. The reunion between Dante and Marcus provided the final pieces of the puzzle that had been tormenting Vivian since receiving the bloody shirt on her wedding day. Marcus Chen was alive but badly injured from the beating he had received, and he had spent the past week documenting evidence of a criminal organization that had been operating for decades. The conspiracy involved not just wealthy families and corrupt law enforcement officials, but also judges, politicians, and business leaders who had been eliminating rivals and witnesses while covering their tracks through an elaborate network of bribery and intimidation. "Detective Martinez isn't a real police officer," Marcus explained, showing them forged credentials and false identification documents. "She's part of an organization that specializes in eliminating threats to their clients' interests. They've been masquerading as law enforcement to gain access to evidence and witnesses, then using that access to cover up crimes and eliminate people who might expose their activities." The revelation that Vivian's father had been deceived rather than complicit provided some relief, but also highlighted the sophistication of the criminal organization they were facing. Harrison Ashworth had been approached by people with apparently legitimate law enforcement credentials who convinced him that his daughter's marriage placed her in a unique position to help solve serious crimes. He had agreed to cooperate because he believed he was helping to bring dangerous criminals to justice, not because he wanted to put his daughter in danger. But the most important discovery was the evidence that Marcus had gathered proving the conspiracy's involvement in multiple murders, including the deaths of several Blackthorne family members. The documentation showed that the criminal organization had been systematically eliminating members of wealthy families who refused to participate in their illegal activities, then taking over their businesses and assets through complex legal maneuvers and forged documents. "Your family has been fighting this organization for years," Marcus told Dante. "Your father knew they had killed your uncle and cousin, and he was preparing to expose them when he died in that car accident. It wasn't an accident. It was murder disguised as automotive failure," just like all the others. The evidence also revealed that the organization had been planning to eliminate both Dante and Vivian after using their marriage to gain access to both families' assets and business connections. The wedding had been seen as an opportunity to position operatives within both the Ashworth and Blackthorne organizations, allowing the criminals to steal millions of dollars while eliminating potential witnesses to their other activities. Armed with Marcus's evidence and their own documentation of the false investigation, Vivian and Dante began the dangerous process of exposing the conspiracy to legitimate law enforcement officials who hadn't been compromised by the criminal organization. The challenge was identifying which officers and agents could be trusted, given that the conspiracy had infiltrated multiple agencies and had been operating undetected for so long. The solution came through an unexpected source, Detective Sarah Martinez's own former partner, Agent Robert Hayes of the FBI, who had been conducting his own investigation into his colleague's suspicious activities. Agent Hayes had noticed discrepancies in Detective Martinez's cases and had begun gathering evidence that she was not who she claimed to be, but he hadn't been able to prove his suspicions until Vivian and Dante provided him with Marcus's documentation. The joint investigation that followed revealed the full scope of a criminal conspiracy that had been responsible for dozens of murders over more than a decade. The organization had been operating like a sophisticated assassination service, eliminating threats to their wealthy clients while stealing assets and covering their tracks through an elaborate network of corruption and deception. The arrests that followed were extensive and dramatic, involving multiple law enforcement agencies and resulting in the exposure of corruption at the highest levels of government and business. Detective Martinez and her associates were charged with murder, conspiracy, fraud, and a host of other crimes, while several prominent business leaders and politicians were exposed as clients who had paid for elimination services. But the most meaningful outcome for Vivian was the realization that her marriage had survived the ultimate test of trust and loyalty. Despite being manipulated by criminals, deceived by people they trusted, and forced to question everything they believed about each other, she and Dante had chosen to work together rather than allow fear and suspicion to destroy their relationship. The experience had taught them both that love alone wasn't enough to sustain a marriage, they also needed honesty, communication, and the courage to face difficult truths together. The bloody shirt that had threatened to destroy their wedding day had ultimately strengthened their bond by forcing them to confront the difference between secrets kept to protect versus secrets kept to deceive. A year later, as Vivian and Dante renewed their wedding vows in a small, private ceremony attended only by their closest friends and family, she reflected on how much they had both changed since that terrible night when she first held evidence that seemed to prove her husband was a killer. The naive young woman who had been willing to believe the worst about someone she loved had been replaced by a stronger person who understood that trust had to be earned through actions rather than words, but that once earned, it was worth fighting to preserve. "I promise to trust you with my doubts as well as my dreams," Vivian said during their vow renewal, looking directly into Dante's eyes. "I promise to ask questions when I'm afraid rather than assume the worst, and I promise to fight alongside you against whatever challenges we face rather than fighting against each other." Marcus Chen, recovered from his injuries and now working as an investigative consultant helping other victims of criminal conspiracies, served as their witness. "You two have proven that love isn't just about the good times," he observed during the small celebration that followed. "It's about choosing to believe in each other even when everything around you is designed to tear you apart." The story of the bloody wedding dress had ended not with the destruction of love, but with its transformation from naive romance into mature partnership. Vivian had learned that the greatest betrayals often come from those we trust most, but that the greatest victories come from choosing to build trust even after it has been broken. The blood on her wedding dress had represented not just evidence of violence, but proof that some things are worth fighting for, and that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who will bleed to protect us, even when we're too frightened or confused to understand their sacrifice. The criminal conspiracy had been exposed and its members brought to justice, but more importantly, Vivian and Dante had discovered that their love was strong enough to survive even the most devastating deception when they chose to face the truth together rather than let fear drive them apart. The wedding that had begun with blood and suspicion had evolved into a marriage built on honesty, courage, and the understanding that real love isn't about never having doubts, it's about choosing to work through those doubts together, no matter how frightening the journey might be.